When it comes to stopping hair loss and regrowing hair, it is easy to be overwhelmed with all the options. From finasteride to dutasteride, minoxidil, PRP, and so on. Today, we'll be looking at the published science and ranking all the available hair loss treatments, from the least to the most effective. Which treatments are a waste of time and which will give you the most hair? There is a clear winner at the #1 spot, and you'll find out what it is in the next few minutes. Stay tuned. Just before we get started today, I highly recommend getting a copy of our new free ebook, The Ultimate Hair Regrowth System. If you're interested in the step-by-step system for getting thicker, healthier hair and fixing hair loss at the root, then this is a must-read. Just check out the link below this video, enter your email, and grab your free copy now. Hello, this is Tony from Hairguard. In today's video, we'll be comparing all the major hair loss treatments and we'll be ranking them from the least to the most effective. And not only that, we're actually going to be putting a number next to each treatment so you'll know exactly how much more or less effective it is in comparison to the rest. But first, let's have a look at the criterion we'll be using for a comparison. How do you measure the success of a hair loss treatment? So there are two ways scientists measure how good a hair loss treatment is. The first is so-called subjective assessment, or global photography. This is where you take before and after photos of the patient's entire head. You take one photo at the start of the treatment and then one at the end. You then have one or more independent, blinded dermatologists assess each pair of photos. Now, the dermatologists are independent because they didn't actually participate in treating the patients. And they're blinded because they don't know what each patient in the photos received. So they don't know, for example, if the patient received active treatment versus placebo, or active treatment 1 versus active treatment 2, and so on. The most common scale used in subjective assessments is 0 for no visible regrowth, 1 for minimal or barely visible regrowth, 2 for moderate or easily visible regrowth, and 3 for marked regrowth that is both easily visible and extensive. But the second method is the one we'll be focusing on today. It's called objective hair counts and uses so-called macro photography. With this method, researchers pick a small patch of balding scalp. This is typically in the crown and is typically 1 centimeter square in area, so very small. Now, after they pick the spot, they mark it with a semi-permanent tattoo. They then use special cameras to take close-up zoom photographs at this area at the start and at the end of treatment. This is so-called macro photography. And then they count the number of hairs in each sample, either manually or through special imaging software. And this allows researchers to know exactly how many new hairs are growing in the sample. So what are the merits of these two methods? Now, both methods, subjective and objective, are useful and they both have their place. Subjective assessments are very useful in telling us if the results are visible to the naked eye. And at the end of the day, this is what the patient wants: visible regrowth to his hair. In this sense, you could say that subjective assessments are superior to the zoomed-in hair counts. But when it comes to comparing treatments, objective hair counts are more useful. They're the so-called gold standard of hair loss research. All serious studies funded by large pharmaceutical companies use objective hair counts. The beauty of this approach is that you collapse all the results into one single neat number: new hairs per centimeter square. And this allows you to compare the various treatments directly against each other. So let's get into it. We're going to start with a recent 2020 review that tried to determine the least and the most effective treatments using the objective hair count method. The researchers were led by A.K. Gupta at the University of Toronto, and they reviewed all randomized clinical trials of androgenetic alopecia monotherapies. They left out studies that treated patients with combination treatments. And as I mentioned, they left out studies that did not report objective hair counts. In the end, Gupta and his team reviewed 30 studies on male androgenetic alopecia. The studies were published between 1986 and 2019, and they had a combined total of 5,679 subjects. Are you ready for the results? Here they are, ranked from the least to the most effective. Compared to placebo, these were the average new hairs per centimeter squared for each of the treatments reviewed. This is from worst to best. Bimatoprost or Lumigan, 4.7 hairs per centimeter squared. Minoxidil 2%, 8.1 hairs per centimeter squared. squared. Minoxidil 5%, 14.9 hairs per centimeter squared. Finasteride 1 milligram daily, 15.9 hairs per centimeter squared. Dutasteride 0.5 milligrams daily, 17.6 hairs per centimeter squared. Low-level light therapy, or LLLT, 20.7 hairs per centimeter squared. And platelet-rich plasma, or PRP, 33.6 hairs per centimeter squared. So, according to this analysis, PRP is the most effective therapy of the bunch. Minoxidil, and especially the 2% strength, is among the weakest. Finasteride and dutasteride are in the middle. Now, one thing the authors did emphasize was that more research is needed to confirm the apparent superiority of the newer treatments, and in particular LLLT and PRP. The evidence for PRP in particular was especially problematic, and the best quality evidence was for 5% minoxidil. We're going to come back to all these points later and look at them in more detail. But what we want to do first is add even more treatments to this table. So, as we said, one major limitation of the Gupta review was that it didn't include combination treatments. It also didn't include studies that were not randomized clinical trials. This made sure that they only reviewed high-quality studies, but on the other hand, they did leave many treatments out. Not just combination therapies like, for example, minoxidil fortified with topical finasteride, but also popular monotherapies like Redensil. So here's what we're going to do. Using the Gupta review as the backbone, we're going to add more treatments to the list. So we're going to add A, combination treatments, as well as B, treatments that are backed by lower quality evidence. To do this, we're going to have to make some statistical adjustments to keep our new data in line with Gupta's data. We will explain these to you as we go along. So here are the other treatments in no particular order. Topical minoxidil fortified with finasteride. So adding topical finasteride to a minoxidil solution gives superior regrowth. According to a 2020 meta-analysis, this combination treatment gives between 9.3 to 14.2 more hairs compared to standalone 3% minoxidil monotherapy. The exact value depends on the statistical assumptions that you use. We're going to be conservative here and go with a lower value of 9.3 hairs. Remember, this is 9.3 hairs more than minoxidil 3% monotherapy. From the Gupta paper, we can calculate the efficacy of 3% minoxidil monotherapy at around 10.3 hairs per centimeter squared. Rough estimate. And if we add 9.3 hairs to the 10.3 hairs from minoxidil monotherapy, we get 19.6 new hairs per centimeter squared. Microneedling with minoxidil. Adding microneedling sessions to an otherwise standard minoxidil treatment has become very popular in recent years. Typically, the sessions are once a week. The first study of this kind came from India in 2013. It reported 91.4 hairs at an area of, quote, 1 centimeter diameter. This is equivalent to 0.78 centimeters squared, giving 117.2 hairs per centimeter squared. This is an incredibly high figure. The comparator treatment in this study was standard 5% minoxidil only with no microneedling. This group had 28.4 new hairs per centimeter squared. This figure is roughly 1.9 times higher than the corresponding figure reported by Gupta and his team. This discrepancy might reflect differences with accounting methodology or with the patient population, or maybe both. So if we adjust the results for the microneedling group with the same factor of 1.9, we end up with 61.7 new hairs per centimeter squared. This figure is still astonishingly high, so you have to see if it meshes with the global assessments of the blinded dermatologists. And it does. They noted visible improvement for 100% of patients in the microneedling group, and 36% of these were given the highest rating, marked regrowth. The published before and after photos also suggest near complete regrowth, at least for some patients. Another research team out of China reported similar results in 2 different studies. Both studies compared, among others, a 5% minoxidil-only group with a combination treatment of microneedling plus minoxidil. In the first study, the 5% minoxidil group had 18.8 new hairs per centimeter squared. This compared to 38.3 for the combination group. In the second study, the 5% minoxidil group had 14.3 new hairs per centimeter squared. This is essentially identical to the figure reported by Gupta and his team, and it compared to 39.8 hairs per centimeter squared for the combination group. So we won't adjust the efficacy figures here because they're so close to the Gupta paper. Now, these 2 Chinese studies together had an average regrowth of 39.1 new hairs per centimeter squared. They also had nearly the same number of patients as the Indian study. So we're going to treat the 2 combined Chinese studies and the Indian studies as 2 equal data points. This gives us an average of 50.4 new hairs per centimeter squared. Redensil. This is a natural naturally derived topical that's sold as a cosmetic for enhancing hair regrowth. The only hair count data we have for this is from a document that comes from the makers of Redensil. And according to this document, Redensil gives an average of 17 new hairs per centimeter squared. Now, the document is not peer-reviewed and makes some questionable assumptions. I'm not going to go into detail here. Suffice it to say, we weren't surprised that it wasn't peer-reviewed. Clascoterone. Clascoterone is a topical anti-androgen medication. It's currently in early phase 3 research, and very likely it will be the next FDA-approved medication against male pattern hair loss. The brand name will be Breezula. The only hair count data we have so far comes from a press release by Cassiopeia, the makers of Breezula. The strongest regrowth was seen with twice-daily application at a 7.5% strength, and compared to placebo, clascoterone gave 14.3 new hairs per centimeter squared. Botulinum toxin, good old Botox injections directly into the scalp. Now, the rationale of this treatment is to loosen the scalp muscles. This is thought to stimulate blood flow and regenerate the follicles. Unfortunately, the first two studies that reported hair count data did so in percentage increase terms, not absolute values. One study reported an 18% density increase and the other a 10% increase. These are very interesting results, but not useful for our purposes, because remember, we're using absolute hair counts, not percentage increase. Luckily, we got more useful data from a 2020 study out of China. Patients were given 4 Botox sessions over 12 months. After 12 months, there was an average of 37.7 new hairs in an area that was 2 centimeters square in size. Dividing this by 2 gives us 18.9 new hairs per centimeter square. Botox plus finasteride. The same Chinese study also included patients who were treated with the 4 Botox sessions plus standard 1 milligram daily finasteride. So you had a combination treatment using 2 completely different modalities, and the treatment lasted for 12 months. At the end, there were 55.9 new hairs in an area that was 2 centimeters square. Dividing this by 2 gives 27.9 new hairs per centimeter square. Ketoconazole shampoo. Ketoconazole is a powerful antifungal, and in the shampoo form, it's commonly sold under the brand name Nizoral. Its stated indication is dandruff, but it's widely used by men with hair loss. It's believed to have anti-androgenic properties, albeit weak, and this puts it in the category of a topical DHT blocker, and it does appear to have an effect against hair loss. We only have one study that reported hair counts after 6 months of Nizoral use and compared it to 2% minoxidil. If we standardize the minoxidil results to those of the Gupta paper, we get a corrected value of 12.4 new hairs for the ketoconazole users. Now, there are several other widely used hair loss treatments. Unfortunately, we don't have published data in terms of hair count per centimeter square, so we can't include them in our table. The most important of these treatments are the following: oral finasteride with topical minoxidil. Surprisingly, there are no studies that report hair counts after this combination treatment. We do know from comparison studies that this combination is superior to either of the monotherapies on its own, so minoxidil on its own or finasteride on its own. Close to 95% of men on this combination will see at least some regrowth. Saw palmetto. This is probably the most widely used natural systemic treatment for hair loss. Unfortunately, we only have a handful of studies and none report hair counts, so we can't compare it to other treatments. Castor oil, probably the most widely used natural topical. Again, we have no data in terms of hair counts per centimeter squared. RU58841, another popular treatment with the hair loss community. The company that held the rights to RU58841 conducted 2 clinical trials in the early 2000s, but they never published the results in full, meaning we can't compare it to other treatments. Now that we've reviewed the additional treatments, we can compile everything in one big table. So starting from the least effective treatment, we have bimatoprost at 4.7 hairs, minoxidil 2% at 8.1 hairs, ketoconazole shampoo at 12.4 hairs, clascoterone at 14.3, minoxidil 5% at 14.9, finasteride 1 milligram daily at 15.9, Redensil at 17, dutasteride 0.5 milligram daily at 17.6, Botox at 18.9, minoxidil fortified with finasteride at 19.6, LLLT at 20.7, Botox plus finasteride at 27.9, PRP at 33.6, and minoxidil plus microneedling at 50.4. So there's 14 treatments in the table, and we took the values for 7 of these directly from the Gupta paper. The other 7 we added separately. Now, the first 2 columns are self-explanatory, and I just read you all the hair count values for each treatment. But the third column is what we call the plausibility of the hair count values. In other words, how much faith we can have in the hair count value for each treatment. How likely it is to be, quote, true. Now, this is a subjective measure, and we made it for the purposes of this video. And subjective means that somebody else could have given different values to ours. It has 3 possible values: high, medium, and low. And for each treatment, we use the following criteria to determine plausibility: the quantity and quality of published research, how much science backs up each treatment, and how good is it. These are adjusted by the value of the hair count. For example, bimatoprost claims 4.7 new hairs per centimeter squared. This is very modest compared, for example, to LLLT's claim of 20.7 hairs per centimeter squared. So it's more plausible even on the basis of weaker evidence. The presence or absence of photos. Studies that report good results should also provide photographic evidence to back them up. Agreement with investigators' subjective assessments. If the hair count increases are large, then this should be easily visible to the naked eye, and this should be reflected in the assessments of the blinded dermatologists. The popularity of the treatments. Successful treatments spread by word of mouth, even in the absence of scientific research. The opposite happens for unsuccessful treatments, even when the science reports are glowing. Just quickly, we've covered a lot of information in this video, so if you want to learn about the simplest, most effective way to regrow hair, then make sure to get your free copy of the Ultimate Hair Regrowth System. We've distilled all the wisdom from these studies into a simple, 3-step system for getting your hair back. Click the link below to get your free copy now. Anecdotal reports. Yes, we do read your comments and the Reddit threads and the forums, and we do take everything into consideration. Biological plausibility. Does the treatment make sense biologically? Conflicts of interest. For example, if a study on PRP is funded by a clinic offering PRP, then this should be taken into account. So let's look at each treatment one by one. Starting from the bottom, bimatoprost is an almost unknown topical that's sold for glaucoma. It's prohibitively expensive and currently unapproved for androgenetic alopecia. So you'll probably have very little interest in it, and we won't bother with it anymore. The next most effective treatment is also one of the most popular in the market, minoxidil 2%. Unfortunately, it's inferior to more or less every other treatment out there. The 5% solution offers far better regrowth, and it makes sense that users should prefer it. But bear in mind, it will also come with more side effects. Ketoconazole shampoo sits between 2% and 5% minoxidil in terms of efficacy. Its big advantage is that it's a shampoo, and this makes it very attractive in terms of user-friendliness. Clascoterone is a promising topical anti-androgen. It's just been FDA approved for acne, and very likely it will be the next FDA approved medication against male pattern hair loss. Now, the hair count data for clascoterone is very limited, and it comes directly from the manufacturers of the drug. Having said that, the reported value of 14.3 new hairs per centimeter squared is more or less equivalent to 5% minoxidil. The drug is also a proven anti-androgen, and these considerations make the hair count plausible. As expected, oral finasteride is superior to minoxidil monotherapy, be it at the 2% or the 5% strength. This agrees with studies that directly compared the two treatments. The other systemic DHT blocker is dutasteride. This is more powerful and also slightly more effective than finasteride. Again, studies that directly compare the two treatments confirm dutasteride superiority. In between finasteride and dutasteride, we have Redensil. This is a naturally derived product. We find it hard to believe that Redensil gives superior regrowth to finasteride. The evidence is weak and not peer-reviewed. Redensil has remained a marginal choice for men with hair loss, even though it's been on the market for quite a few years now. Botox claims efficacy superior to finasteride, but not by much. At this point, there's several studies suggesting it is effective. Whether it really is superior to finasteride remains to be seen. It's also a bit difficult to accept that combined with finasteride, it can more or less double its strength. It could be the case, but we'd like to see more evidence. Topical minoxidil fortified with finasteride is superior to either treatment on its own, and this makes sense. The two drugs have different mechanisms of action, so we can expect them to promote hair growth in a so-called synergistic manner. The results for the next two treatments are problematic in terms of plausibility. First, we have LLLT. This easily beats finasteride and dutasteride in our table. Yet anecdotally, most users report disappointing results. Another problem is the almost complete lack of photographic evidence to back up the hair counts. Investigator assessments also often suggest no visible regrowth, and this is in spite of impressive differences in hair counts. And then we have PRP. Now, going by hair counts, this is the second most effective treatment. Its hair count figure is twice that of finasteride. Now, if this were the case, we would expect to see regrowth for the vast majority of patients, in excess of 90% or something like that. that. But users generally report disappointing results. The hair loss community views PRP with suspicion, especially considering the high cost. The medical community itself is also split in terms of accepting PRP as a valid treatment. For this reason, we find it difficult to accept the PRP results at face value. So this brings us to the final and most effective treatment on the table. By far the most effective. Microneedling in combination with minoxidil. 50 new hairs per centimeter squared is more than 3 times as effective as finasteride or 5% minoxidil. It's also roughly 2.5 times higher than the next most effective treatment with high plausibility, topical minoxidil fortified with finasteride. Yet, in spite of the very high values, we find these figures to be plausible. They're reported independently by different research teams. The dermatologist assessments are also in agreement with the hair counts, and they suggest visible regrowth for almost all patients. Photographic evidence is also provided in all the studies. Also very important, there can be no significant conflict of interest on the part of the researchers, because a microneedling device costs next to nothing, and minoxidil has been off patent for years. This is not the case with LLT devices or PRP treatments, where there can be significant financial conflicts of interest. Microneedling has also become very popular among men with hair loss. We've all seen remarkable photos uploaded all over the internet suggesting near complete regrowth. Taken together, all these considerations suggest that the seemingly outrageous hair counts are indeed highly plausible. In terms of efficacy, there is a clear winner. Microneedling in combination with topical minoxidil is by far the most effective treatment. It's multiple times more powerful than other standard monotherapies like finasteride or minoxidil. Almost all users will see at least some regrowth. For many, around a third, the improvement will be dramatic. It's also a very low-cost treatment, and side effects are typically minimal, either the topical reactions to the minoxidil or the irritation from the microneedling. On the other hand, this treatment is quite demanding in terms of time. You have the daily minoxidil, which is a hassle, and you also have the weekly microneedling sessions. Now, when you factor in the time to prepare and the time to clean up afterwards, each microneedling session can take about an hour of your time. In terms of ease of use, there are 3 clear winners: ketoconazole shampoo, finasteride, and dutasteride. All 3 will take up no additional time in the user's daily schedule. In the case of ketoconazole, the user simply replaces a supermarket shampoo with a ketoconazole shampoo. Finasteride and dutasteride are once daily pills, so again, no extra time demands. The difference between the 3 is that ketoconazole shampoo has no significant side effects, and this is not always the case with finasteride and dutasteride. Minoxidil monotherapy seems like a poor choice, especially at the 2% strength. The 5% strength is superior, but bear in mind you might get more side effects. Minoxidil fortified with finasteride gives even better results and without the side effects of oral finasteride. Redensyl monotherapy doesn't seem very promising either, but users could get some benefit from it as part of a combination treatment. The newer, more expensive treatments in the form of LLT and PRP are problematic. With LLT, there's the cost of purchasing the device for home use, and it's also the most demanding in terms of time. Now, most manufacturers of these devices recommend a few sessions a week, typically about 3 or 4, and a typical session is around 15 minutes a day. So we're talking about a significant time commitment, and it's difficult to justify this kind of investment in time and money when there's more effective and more plausible treatments on the table. PRP is one of the most expensive treatments on the table. For men where budget is not an issue, PRP makes sense as a treatment option. Sessions are spaced out once every few months, and this means a minimal time investment, and there's also no side effects. At worst, you just won't get any results. For a minority of men, it could even give satisfactory results as a monotherapy. But more realistically, it could boost the effects of other treatments in a combination regimen. Now, having said that, for the majority of men with hair loss, budget is a consideration. And for these men, PRP does not make sense. It's just too expensive. And the same considerations apply for Botox. So we need to acknowledge that what we've just done, compiling all the treatments into one table, has severe limitations. These become apparent when we consider what would be the ideal way to compare all the hair loss treatments. That would be one single study, and it would be carried out by one single research team using one research protocol. And it would look something like this. You'd have one massive interdisciplinary team of scientists and dermatologists with unlimited logistics and unlimited funds. And they would recruit thousands of volunteers, and all the volunteers would fulfill the same inclusion and exclusion criteria. For example, they would be of a certain age bracket or hair loss stage. Their baseline hair count would be recorded using a single set of criteria. The volunteers would then be randomly assigned to one of the 14 treatments we looked at. At the end of 6 or 12 months, the hair counts would again be carefully recorded. Blinded dermatologists would also subjectively assess the before and after photos of the entire head. But such a study is practically impossible. It would be prohibitively complex and expensive. A handful of institutions and multinational companies would have the funds and logistics to carry it out, but none have the motivation to do it. So we're never going to see a study of this kind. The only alternative is to piece together data from many different studies, which is what we've done here. Unfortunately, these studies are very heterogeneous. They're what you could call a mixed bag. For example, they've recruited men with various degrees of hair loss. Some men were pre-treated while others had never received prior hair loss treatment. Some teams of researchers took hair counts in the crown and others took them in the top of the head, for example. Treatment in some studies lasted for 4 months and in others 12 months or more. Some teams of researchers had better technicians and these did a better job at counting the hairs. Some might have simply reported false or manipulated data. There were also differences in what counts as a hair. For example, are vellus hairs included? And do we compare to placebo or do we just report the absolute value in the treatment group? Now, two important and somewhat arbitrary decisions we had to make when filming this video were A, whether to include studies on women, and B, whether to include data from sources that were not peer-reviewed. Many treatments that work for women also tend to work for men, but many don't, and female hair loss is generally easier to treat, and for this reason we didn't include studies on women. On the other hand, we did include data from non-peer-reviewed sources, like for example company press releases. The alternative was to leave out certain treatments altogether. We also had to make a number of statistical decisions when compiling all the data into one table. For example, on adjusting the values that seemed too high, on weighing studies by the sample size, and so on. We erred on the side of simplicity and we kept in mind the general viewership of this video. Someone else might have made different statistical choices. These are subjective and justifiable either way. For all these reasons, the table we've presented to you leaves a lot to be desired. You should best view it as a general roadmap, not the final word. But bear in mind that the alternative to this analysis would be to simply not attempt any quantitative comparison whatsoever. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Were you surprised by the results? What would you have expected the top treatment to be? We read all your comments. Till next time, this was Tony for Hairguard.